Thank you, Deputy Governor, members of the media, members of the Monetary Policy Committee and Financial Stability Committee, CEO Capital Markets Authority following us online. Good morning to you all.
Good morning.
A warm welcome to all participants joining us in person but also online. And today's presentation is grounded in our core mandate as Central Bank to maintain price stability, promote a sound, inclusive financial system, which are critical foundations of our resilient economy and public confidence. The quarterly Monetary Policy Committee and Financial Stability Committee meetings are not just statutory requirements, they are indeed essential tools for transparency and responsive policy making, and the Central Bank's priority remains a data-driven approach to ensure inflation remains within the target range of 2 to 8% as we continue to monitor global economic developments, global risk, trade patterns, and domestic economic conditions closely. Starting this session, we will outline the rationale behind our recent Monetary Policy and Financial Stability Committee's decisions and how they align with our commitment to prudent macroeconomic management and a forward-looking policy framework. We will start with a look at global economic developments. Global GDP is slowing down, although projections that we have been revised upward by the IMF World Economic Outlook, supported by easing trade tensions and a slowdown in underlying trade barriers. So global GDP is expected to reach 3% in 2025. This is a 0.1% percentage point upward revision from the projections that we had in May. And in 2026, we expect GDP growth globally at 3.1%. If we break this down by region, we see that advanced economies are expected to grow more modestly at 1.5% in 2025 and 1.6% in 2026, while in our region, in sub-Saharan Africa, the GDP is projected to stabilize at 4% in 2025, which is equal to the same GDP growth rate last year. And next year in 2026, growth would recover with expectations of continued improvement at 4.3%, reflecting the region's economic resilience. As a committee, we also looked at global inflation trends. Global inflation is overall easing with a projection of an inflation rate at 4.2%. compared to 5.6% that we had in 2024. In sub-Saharan Africa, it's the same trend. When we had last year an inflation rate at 18.3%, the inflation it projects you to decrease at 13.3% in 2025. It's still high, and risks such as currency depreciation and food price volatility persist in some economies in our region. We looked at commodity prices, which are projected to decline. As you can see, be it on the energy index or non-energy index, they're all falling, with energy prices expected to fall by 17.4% this year, following OPEC's decisions to increase supply. Food prices are also expected to reduce by 7%, which will ease import cost pressures. However, we see that prices of export commodities such as coffee and minerals remain elevated, but this supports Rwanda's exports earnings since these are traditional exports that we have. On the external sector, the data on Rwanda's international trade is encouraging. In the second quarter of 2025, exports increased by 15.5%. And this was driven by strong performance in traditional exports, especially coffee with favorable global prices, but also higher volumes. When we also looked at non-traditional exports, they were rising by 31%, and these are mainly products of cooking oil and wheat flour, reflecting the good performance of our domestic industry sector. On the other hand, we saw that imports grew only by 3.3% in the second quarter of 2025, reflecting a moderate increase in the imports of intermediate goods and notable declines in fuel and capital goods imports, while increases in consumer goods were driven by domestic demand. Therefore, the trade deficit in the second quarter of this year narrowed by 2.9%, which is a positive development for external sector stability. This has an impact on our foreign exchange market, where foreign exchange pressures reduced when we compare the second quarter of 2025 and the same period in 2024. At the end of June 2025, the depreciation of the Rwandan franc against the US dollars was at 2.96%, whereas a year prior it was at 3.73%. And this improvement in exchange rate stability can be explained by a narrowing trade deficit, as we have just seen, a weaker US dollar on global markets, but also the impact of domestic foreign exchange market reforms that we have conducted. We are now moving to the domestic economy performance. Rwanda's economy continues to perform well in the second quarter of 2025. As you may recall, in the first quarter of this year, GDP growth stood at 7.8%, with broad-based contribution from services and industry, and a modest recovery in agriculture. Data for the second quarter are not yet released, but when we look at our high-frequency indicators, they point to a sustained economic momentum in the second quarter, with our composite index of economic activities rising by 12.5% in the second quarter, reflecting strong performance across all sectors. We now move on to the monetary market developments. In the second quarter of this year, all rates have declined. Starting with money market rates, the interbank rate on average in the second quarter was at 6.3% compared to 8.14% that we had in the same period in 2024. In line with the CBR, the deposit rate also has reduced to 9.75%. This is in comparison to 10.17% deposit rate we had in the same quarter, in the same period in 2024. And in the lending rate on average, they also decreased at 15.97%, which is a decrease from the 16.25% that we had in 2024 in the second quarter. As a committee, we looked at inflation developments domestically. For the second quarter, headline inflation has stabilized at 6.7%. This was driven mainly by a decline in core inflation that has offset an increase we've seen in fresh food, but also an uptick in energy deflation. The decline that we noted in core inflation reflects lower transport inflation, with the fading impact of upward revision of transport services a year ago, and this offset increases in core hotels and food inflation. For fresh food inflation, the increase is driven by higher vegetables inflation, reflecting the end of season A, but also the delayed season B harvests. When we take a look back at inflation trends since 2022, you may recall that we had very high inflation in 2022 and 2023, and a core inflation, which excludes volatile elements of the consumer price index, it's the yellow bar on the chart, consistently reduced from the first quarter of 2024, and we had a peak in November 2022. Thanks to the monetary policy stance and other policy measures to maintain price stability, headline inflation has remained within the range since the first quarter of 2024, although we have started to see pressures in the last quarters that have driven headline inflation to 6.7%. In recent months, we're also seeing inflation pressures. In July, headline inflation stood at 7.3% from 7% in the previous month, on the back of an increase in core and energy inflation, while fresh food inflation declined. And so as a committee, we look at projections for inflation. Although inflation is expected to remain within the target range that we have of 2% to 8%, we see that headline inflation is projected to average 7.1% for this year, reducing back to 5.6% in 2026. The upward revision of these projections compared to the last round of Monetary Policy Committee in May is due to several factors. And in addition, we see that there are risks to this outlook, particularly linked to adverse weather conditions, which could affect agricultural production, geopolitical tensions and trade uncertainties that could influence domestic conditions, as well as the fact that we have uncertainties on agricultural productions. And as Monetary Policy Committee, we continue to monitor these developments. And therefore, taking into consideration recent developments as well as new projections, the monetary policy has decided to increase the central bank rate to 6.75%. This is a slight increase of 25 basis points. And this level for us is considered adequate to keep inflation within the target. And that's the end of our first presentation on monetary policy. I will now move to the Financial Sector Committee discussions and decisions. The committee reviewed recent developments in Rwanda's financial system and assessed potential risks to stability. The financial sector continues to expand, driven by strong economic momentum. As of June 2025, as you can see, total financial sector assets grew by 23%, reaching 14 trillion. And growth was recorded across all sectors. Banks' assets increased by 23%. On the microfinance side, the increase was at 21%, while the pension sector assets also increased at 26%. On the back of rise in contribution following recent changes in public pension contribution rates. Insurance sector's assets also rose by 18%, and this growth reflects overall a stable and deepening financial system. As a committee, we also looked at the role of the financial sector in the economy, where we can observe continued financial deepening to support economic development. Assets to GDP ratio rose to 71.3% in the second quarter of 2025, up from 65.6% that we had a year earlier. And this performance is linked to strong growth in deposits, higher returned earnings, and sustained credit expansion. I will talk about credit developments. The financial sector continued to play a key role in supporting economic activities, with outstanding loans in banks increasing by 15% and loans in microfinance institutions growing by 20.8%. And when we look at active borrowers, being households and corporates, they are now reaching more than 1,100,000. We also look at now, go back to banking sector stability. So the banking sector remains sound and stable. Its capital ratio is adequate to absorb shocks, with the capital adequacy ratio at 21.6%, well above the minimum requirement of 15%. Non-performing loans have also dropped to 2.6% in the second quarter of 2025, which is well below the maximum threshold of 5%. And the liquidity coverage ratio is at 289%, well above the minimum of 100%, reflecting ample liquidity in the banking sector. Moreover, When we look at profitability for the sector, it remains high, with return, going back to the banking, return on equity is at 18.6% for the second quarter, and the slight decline observed compared to the same period last year is due to slower growth in interest income and rising operating costs. The microfinance sector remains healthy and efficient, with notable improvements across key indicators. The capital adequacy ratio rose to 34.7%, supported by capital injections and the conversion of borrowings into equity. Non-performing loan ratio declined to 3.4%, and while profitability improved, with return on equity at 14.8%, driven by aggregated better loan quality and strong credit demand in the sector. I think we might go back to the financing of sectors that I skipped. As we were looking at the credit markets, we observed that finance sectors by banks were first and foremost construction, then the trade sector, manufacturing, individual loans, and then transport. For the microfinance sector, it's another picture where the trade sector is the first finance during the quarter, followed by construction, agriculture at 14%, and education at 10%. We thought it was important to also show by sector how credit is being dispersed. As a committee, we also looked at the progress in consolidation of Umurenge SACCOs. There is good progress where now we have 9 district SACCOs that have been formed, and 5 additional district SACCOs are in the final stages of the process. And this consolidation has led to expanded lending capacity that we've just seen in the numbers for the microfinance institution, improved service delivery, and greater operational efficiency of Umurenge SACCOs and now district SACCOs overall. We move now to the insurance sector. The insurance sector was also meeting all prudential requirements, being in terms of solvency ratio, which is now at 215%, above the minimum threshold of 100%. The liquidity ratio was also 109%, above the minimum requirement, which allows the insurance sector to meet their short-term obligations. And profitability remains solid, with a return on equity at 19.2% and return on assets at 8.6%, driven by investment income, although we noted as a committee that there are still challenges linked to underwriting performance. Moving on to the pension sector. The public pension fund assets continue to grow, with a growth of 26%. To 2 trillion rand and franc by the end of the second quarter 2025. But at the same time, the benefits for pensioners have also increased by 61%, reaching 43 billion in the first 6 months of 2025, which enhances pensioner welfare. The committee looked at developments in Ejoheza long-term savings scheme, which also expanded significantly by 31%, which is total assets now at 80 billion. And also looking at contributors, they continue to increase, but mainly at 82% of all Ejoheza contributors are in the informal sector, which gives confidence on the purpose of Ejoheza to provide pension and insurance coverage for people in the informal sector, demonstrating the scheme's growing reach and also inclusivity. And lastly, as a committee, we looked at retail digital payments, which continue to drive accessibility and efficiency, highlighting increased usage across various platforms. As you can see, retail payment as of June 2025, they had reached 68 trillion rand and franc, and now electronic payments account for over 343% of GDP, underscoring the growing role of digital finance in supporting inclusive economic activity and financial sector transformation. We also looked at eCash, which is Rwanda's interoperable instant payment system. Continues to support the national vision of a cashless and inclusive financial system. As you can see, adoption is also increasing, with transaction values having increased to 37.7 billion at the end of June 2025, which is a fourfold increase from the 9.4 billion that we had in the same period in 2024. In terms of active users, eCash now has 2.1 million users and has already onboarded 20 financial institutions as participants. This reflects increased trust and usage across the financial system. Now, what we looked at as a committee is potential risk. We expect our financial sector in the medium term to remain stable and resilient. However, some risks that we have identified include potential rise in cost of funds in global and domestic markets, potential decline in asset values, particularly equity prices, amid ongoing financial uncertainties globally, as well as operating risk stemming from the increased use of digital financial services. Another risk is around credit and deposit concentration, particularly in the banking system. In response, the National Bank of Rwanda remains vigilant and committed to implementing timely, evidence-based policies to preserve the stability and soundness of the financial system. I thank you all for your kind attention, and we are ready to take your questions.
Thank you, Governor. We can now open up for questions, limiting 2 questions for each media outlet. You'll start by introducing yourself, then your question, and with your permission, Governor, we'll take a round of 3 questions and then answer. Thank you. RBA.
Urakoze nyakubahwa Governor, nitwa Placide Nyenshuti nkorera RBA. Ikibazo cya mbere nifuza kubaza ni kirebana n'izamuka ry'ibiciro, aho mwatubwiye ko ipimo byanyu bigaragaza ko bizazamuka cyangwa se bitegereje kuzamuka kuri 7.1% muri uyu mwaka. Twanareba no kuri mabare mwatweretse tubona ko ugereranyije n'umwaka ushize byagiye bizamuka, tukabona biri hafi kugera ku 8 kuri zambago muvuga. Murasobanura mute ingamba muri gufata kugira ngo bitazarenga 8 kugira ngo n'abaturage bagire icyizere kugira ngo ibiciro bidakomeza kubakomerera ku isoko. Ikindi kibazo cy'amatsiko, ushize mwatubwiye ko mufite umushinga wo gukora reserve muri zahabu. Twifuza kumenya aho ugeze ndetse niba nibyo mwifuzaga mutekereza uyu mushinga reba mubona hari umusaruro uzatanga. Ikindi ni kirebana CBDC, ushize mwatubwiye ko hari development mugezeho ndetse n'amagerageza mwatangiye hagati yanyu. Turifuza kumenya ese iki twakwitega nk'abantu bari muri bakurikirana ibirebana n'uyu mushinga kugira ngo abanyarwanda bamenye aho ugeze ndetse n'ingamba mufite kugira ngo, kuko ibihugu byinshi byagerageje ariko bikagera ahantu ugasanga birabihagaritse cyangwa se nta nicyo bigezeho. Icyo muri gukora niki kugira ngo uyu mushinga uzabyarire inyungu igihugu ndetse n'ubukungu muri rusange? Murakoze.
I think you can take from.
Bari babemereye bibiri ariko ubwo baguhaye bonus ya gatatu. Murakoze Placide kuri iki kibazo. Icya mbere nibyo koko turabona ko umuvuduko w'ibiciro ugenda uzamuka ariko ntabwo uragera kuri zambago z'8%. Nkuko byagiye bigaragara, twagiye tubona ko muri aya mezi abiri ashize umuvuduko w'ibiciro wageze kuri 7% mu kwezi kwa gatandatu, 7.3% mu kwezi kwa karindwi. Ahanini bikaba bishingiye ku biciro twabonye ku by'ibiribwa, cyane cyane ko ayo mezi ariho umusaruro wa season A ubusa nko warangiye, hanyuma na season B nayo aribwo umusaruro hari, ariko ntago umusaruro wabonetse ari nko wari witezwe. Ikindi mwabonye ko mu kwezi kwa karindwi hari ibiciro byagiye nabyo bizamuka byaba ibiciro ku bikomoka kuri peteroli ndetse n'ibiciro bijyanye nk'uko twabibonye n'ibijyanye n'amahoteli kubera VAT yagiye ishyirwaho, ibyo bikazamura ibiciro, ariko tubona ko atari ikintu giteye impungenge nubwo nka politike y'ifaranga twashatse kongera gato ku rwunguko rwa Banki Nkuru y'u Rwanda kugira ngo uyu mwaka ndetse n'ukurikira tutageza kuri cya kigero cy'umuvuduko w'ibiciro wagera kuri ku 8%. Ni nayo mpamvu twasobanuye mu kwezi kwa gatanu twabonaga yuko umuvuduko w'ibiciro utazarenga 6.9% niba nibuka neza, ndetse na 3.9% muri 2026 dusubiye mu mibare kubera ayo makuru yindi twari dufite byaba ku musaruro w'ubuhinzi ndetse n'ibyo biciro bindi byiyongereye mu kwezi kwa karindwi. Tubona yuko umuvuduko w'ibiciro wazamuka, ariko nk'uko twabyerekanye umuntu asubiye kuri ya slide yerekanye uko umuvuduko w'ibiciro wagiye wiyongera mu myaka 3 ishize, n'ingamba zafashwe kugira ngo byongere bigaruke kuri za mbago. Dufite icyizere ko dukomeje izi ngamba twafashe ndetse n'izindi ngamba zigenda zishyirwaho na leta kugira ngo ibiciro bitiyongera cyane, tutazarenga izi mbago z'8%. Ikibazo cya kabiri cyerekeranye na zahabu cyangwa n'ishoramari muri zahabu. Turebye foreign reserves dufite cyangwa se ikigega cy'amafaranga yo hanze u Rwanda ruba rufise kandi ari Banki Nkuru y'u Rwanda ibishinzwe, hari impamvu ebyiri zatumye duhitamo gutangira gushora muri kugura zahabu nk'ishoramari rituma tugira icyambere kuba dufite instruments zitandukanye. Ubundi akenshi ubona ko Banki Nkuru mu bihugu byinshi zishora ayo mafaranga ziba zifite mu mpapuro mpeshwamwenda z'ibihugu bitandukanye, ariko nanone kubera ko hari ibihugu butamenya politike y'ifaranga yabo uko bigenda cyangwa se n'ubukungu bwabo budafiteho control, cyangwa twanarebaga ese nta handi twashora imari ku kigero kitari kirekire ariko bituma tugira iyo diversification ku buryo nta mbogamizi twagira hagize ikibazo kiba ku mpapuro zindi mpeshwamwenda tuba dufite. Aho rero nk'uko twari twabitangaje twatangiye muri uyu mwaka w'ingengo y'imari, kandi uwo mwaka nurangira ubwo tuzajya dutangaza aho iryo shoramari rigeze. Icyiza tubona nuko ibiciro bya zahabu bikomeza kuzamuka ku buryo ushoyemo imari aba yizeye inyungu buri mwaka. Mu mibare twabonye mu myaka 20 ishize ni inyungu igera kuri 11% buri mwaka. Rero ni igipimo gishimishije, ariko dukomeza kureba ko nta zindi mbogamizi zahindura iyo mibare dufite. Icyanyuma wari wabajije kuri CBDC cyangwa ifaranga koranabuhanga. Nibyo koko twatangiye icyo bita proof of concept, ni igerageza rya mbere riba riri ku bantu bake cyane kugira ngo turebe ko bwa bushakashatsi twari twakoze bwari bwerekanye inyungu twabona mu ifaranga koranabuhanga, byaba igabanyuka ry'ikiguzi cyangwa se ry'igiciro umuntu atanga yoherezanya amafaranga, byaba se kuba iryo faranga koranabuhanga ryatuma dukoresha ikoranabuhanga ku buryo bushimishije, ariko bikanagabanya ibibazo tujya tubona muri systeme zidakora neza mu guhererekanya amafaranga. Ikindi cya gatatu cyari ukwerekana ko cyagaragaye mu bushakashatsi ariko nacyo kigomba kugeragezwa, ni ukwerekana ko koherezanya amafaranga n'ibihugu by'amahanga mukoresheje iri faranga koranabuhanga CBDC byagabanuka igiciro 30%. Ibyo ni bigaragara mu bushakashatsi, ariko nibyo turimo kugerageza kugira ngo turebe koko ko ibyagaragaye mu bushakashatsi biba bikiri theory, iyo koko utangiye gushyiraho iyo technology bikunda. Aho rero mu kwezi kwa 9 ni kurangira tuzatangaza ibyavuye muri iryo gerageza rya mbere proof of concept, bizaduha n'amakuru ahagije kugira ngo tube twatangira icyo bita pilot, ni igerageza noneho mu baturage ryatanga amakuru atuma na leta twayiha amakuru igashobora gufata icyemezo ko iryo faranga ryatangira ayo makuru ya nyuma y'igerageza tuyizeye muri 2026.
Bloomberg, and then CNBC.
Hello, Governor. My name is Indira Ganga with Bloomberg. I know that the central bank target range is about 2 to 8% for inflation, and in the month of July, you said you hit 7.3%, annual projection 7.1%. So I'd just like to find out from you, is there more headroom for MPC to increase rates or to hike rates further if inflation continues to breach that upper limit target range? Thank you.
Thank you, Governor. My name is Abi Agina from CNBC Africa, and I just also want to say thank you for the detailed update in your presentation, and also to welcome the new Deputy Governor on this other side. Well, my question is in regards to the decision to cut the rate. Just give me some context in terms of the inflation numbers versus how the currency has also held. If you could give me an update on that. And secondly, I'd like to know where have you reached with the transition towards gold as a bank, if there's an update from that front. Thank you.
Thank you. On the question on what we see as risks on inflation, reaching 8% and beyond, and what monetary policy committee is considering as actions, I'll let our chief economist respond to that. And then also ask the chief economist to walk through the rationale behind our slight increase of the CBR, and then I'll take the question on gold.
Thank you, Governor, and thank you for the questions. Starting with the first one. Yes, you're right. We saw an increase in inflation, as the Governor mentioned, in the months of July and June. It's around 7%, now 7.3%. So we took that into account, plus all the recent development that we see and the drivers of inflation, to revise our projections. As you know, we do that every quarter, so it is dynamic. Last time when we were here, we were projecting 6.5% for the year 2025. This has been revised up to 7.1% for this year on average. Still, it is below 8%, but we saw pressures coming and the risks that are there around. Right now, in the baseline scenario, we have goods. We have projections of international commodity prices coming down. We have projections of a good harvest in the agriculture sector in the months to come. But if the weather conditions are changing, or if the situation geopolitically, globally is changing, that can have an impact on these two factors. So taking that into account, actually, the increase of 0.25%, the response we are having now to avoid having inflation going above 8%. That's the main reason.
So that means that you're not worried, or are you keeping your options open?
So what we do, we actually revise it every quarter. So next time we need to reassess the situation and see if the risk materialize or not. And at that time, then we'll see what will be the appropriate decision. What is sure is that the MPC took this decision knowing that they are very, the committee is actually willing to do anything possible so that this rate does not go up all the way to above 8%. As you saw in the previous 2 years, we had inflation that was very high, and at the time, MPC took the decision to increase the rate. So we will see what will happen in the future, but basically, the reaction of today to increase by 0.25% is to prevent inflation to continue going up. There was a question also link between depreciation and inflation.
If you could maybe repeat that question.
Thank you. It was in regards to the currency and the outlook in regards to you're seeing the exports have not really marshaled up as was projected earlier. The depreciation is slowing down. For the first 6 months, we've seen
slowdown in depreciation compared to last year. That's in line with the normalization that we've been talking about after the pressures we saw in 2023. Since then, we are back to a usual trend in terms of depreciation. And the good news is that actually the export performance has been good in the second quarter. If this continues, it will help also putting much less pressure on the exchange rate. In a nutshell, this also does not have an impact, negative impact on inflation. We are not worried about pressures from exchange rate to inflation. We are more looking at other risks to inflation than these ones.
Thank you. And on the question on gold, as we had announced, this financial year that started in July is the year that we are starting to invest in gold. And so those investments have started. And the good news is that we see that the price of gold, as we had anticipated in our research, continues to increase. I think around $106,000, $108,000 per kilo. And the annual return on gold prices in the last 20 years has been around 11%. And as central bank, of course, when we invest our foreign exchange reserves, I would say objective is one, to maintain capital, and that is achieved through gold, and even diversification from government security instruments and adding gold to our portfolio. Second is to have a liquid assets, and gold is liquid and sought after by all central banks and other players, and also having a consistent return. So those three objectives are met, and we will continue to invest in gold as opportunities arise. Thank you. Sure. And then we let other people ask questions.
How much have you spent on gold so far?
Generally don't publish our investment portfolio until the end of the financial year. So June 2026, the annual report that comes, we will have those details. Okay. But I can assure you that our reserves are still adequate, above 4 months of imports at end of June 2025.
It's Kigali Today and New Times. You'll introduce yourself.
Murakoze nyakubahwa Gavana, nitwa Emeline Mbabazi, nkorera Radio Disi na TV10. Hagiye gushira amezi abiri Beneri ishyizeho amabwiriza ku bantu bishyuzaga serivisi zimwe nk'ubukode n'izindi mu mafaranga y'amanyamahanga. Ndifuza kubaza, nyuma y'icyo gihe mubona hari icyo byatanze kuba abantu baba bararekeye kubikora no babikoraga mu buryo butemewe? Murakoze.
Murakoze Governor, and may I add my congratulations to the Deputy Governor. The financial sector is growing rapidly, it seems. Within it, there is usually a lot of mystification from people, ordinary people, about the financial sector. And added to that, there are an awful lot of people who feel that there is a lot to be gained by getting involved in it, trading privately and so on. So what I'm really wondering, is there a clear path and clear regulations either now or intended to be planned so that everybody in a country understands at each stage of development and how they can get involved and where they can get involved and when they can get involved? Secondly, please, on the gold. Yes, it's good that the prices of gold are increasing, but on the other hand, it also means that if the investment is being done now, it also means that it is being bought at a fairly high price. So could you tell us about that balance and see? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ndahera ku kibazo cya nyine muri Radio 10 ku byerekeranye n'amabwiriza twatanze asobanura gukoreshwa kw'ifaranga ry'u Rwanda, ndetse anabuza abantu bari bakishyuza ubukode mu madolari kandi bishyuza abanyarwanda n'ifaranga ryemewe mu Rwanda ari ifaranga ry'u Rwanda. Aho icyo twabonye nuko abantu benshi bagiye bahindura amakontrakt bari bafite, cyane cyane mu nyubako z'ubucuruzi niho twabonaga abantu batubaza cyangwa batubwira yuko babasaba kwishyuza mu madolari. Ubundi ifaranga ryemewe mu Rwanda ni ifaranga ry'u Rwanda, kereka mu bucuruzi bumwe na bumwe cyangwa sectors zikorana n'abanyamahanga cyangwa se zohereza ibintu mu mahanga binabivanayo. Ubu turimo tunareba nuko dusobanura neza ayo mabwiriza kugira ngo sectors zemerewe kuba zikoresha amafaranga y'amahanga, ubundi amahoteli aremerewe, n'izindi serivisi zijyanye n'ubukerarugendo, zijyanye no kohereza ibicuruzwa hanze, ku buryo hari ibiganiro n'inzego zitandukanye ndetse n'urwego rw'abikorera kugira ngo ibyo binozwe. Ariko ubundi icyo tubona nuko hari umusaruro mwiza kuko abantu bagiye noneho bahindura kandi banumva neza impamvu ayo mabwiriza ariho, ariko bisaba gukomeza kwigisha kandi n'abantu bigiye bigaragara yuko bakora ibinyuranyije n'amabwirizwa nabwo tugenda tubikurikirana n'izindi nzego dukorana ku buryo twumva ko rwose mu mezi 6 ari imbere ari ibintu bizaba byacitse burundu, n'ababa bikorwa nk'uko mwabibonye bakaba babihanirwa. So for the question from Kigali today, on the first one, I'm not sure I understood whether it's investments in all kinds of assets or particular assets, if you could.
So really it's clarity and understanding from ordinary people about the sector is growing hugely. And people want to get involved somehow. Some will want to do some trading, some can invest, the degree depending on whether or not it's small or big, So what I'm really trying to understand is that is there somewhere they can look? If somebody in the market wants to invest, $500,000 or whatever, is there somewhere where they can look and say, these are the regulations, this is where I can get involved in a sector, or is there something planned on that? Demystifying the financial sector since it's growing so rapidly. Really.
Thank you. I will start with probably the subsectors that we regulate, and I'm hoping that CEO Tapelo from Capital Markets can also chip in after that. In terms of maybe looking at one, growth of the financial sector and why it's growing. So if the banking sector, the main driver, as we've seen, remains credit, and so it's people taking out loans, and the good news is even lending rates are going down, maybe not to the level we would still want as consumers, but it's going down. Second is to look at, for us as central bank, we are the issuer on behalf of government of treasury bonds. And we've seen that uptake from retail investors is actually increasing, and through possibly more investment trusts. We don't have many, let's say, mutual funds and investment trusts, but there's a framework around that. And in the saving mobilization, it's one thing that we continue as BNR, but also Capital Markets Authority, to educate people on investing on the bond market and the capital markets. And lastly, I think all efforts that we are conducting as a central bank, but also government, in terms of financial education and promoting financial inclusion, is giving people first access to financial services. And what we've seen in the last FinScope is now 92% of Rwandans at least have either a bank or a microfinance account or a mobile wallet. And that's the first step generally to start now moving up the ladder to build wealth or even, strengthen your financial resilience. Once you have an account or a mobile wallet, you can start saving, and there's been a lot of campaigns around saving. You can start investing, and you will also, are starting a national insurance strategy that we're hoping that it will be completed this year, which has a component on education on insurance sector, so that people can start also covering their assets, which is part of having financial resilience. So I think I would stop there and then ask probably CEO Tapelo if he's still online to come on.
CEO, can you hear us?
I think maybe I'll speak on behalf of Capital Markets Authority because he was part of our Financial Stability Committee meetings. They have, continue to reform the capital market. It's true that there are still challenges of low adoption in terms of people investing in the stock exchange, but also we haven't yet seen more companies listing, at least on the equity side, but there are reforms being conducted, including government looking at privatization, and one of the exit strategy is to list government-owned companies. So we will see more and more companies being listed. But on private sector side, the Capital Markets Authority and Rwanda Stock Exchange have also conducted investment clinics for companies that would be interested in listing so that they meet requirements to be able to list. We've also seen more products in terms of corporate bonds and sustainability-linked bonds or green bonds. And this is a good development that we think will give more opportunities for people to have a broader array of investment and securities they can invest in. But I think the most important thing is continuous education, financial literacy, for people to understand the opportunities, but also the risk, and be able to make informed decision about their investment, but also their financial planning. And there was a question on gold. True, people who have bought gold in 2000 or 2004 have made a lot of money. However, the trend in terms of increase in return is not going down because there's more demand. True, when you buy at a higher price, you have less quantity of gold, but the return on your investment still remains above the 10%. So it's still a very good investment. And as I explained, we continue to monitor if there would be any headwind on that. But projections for the next 10 years, although every projection has risk, show that that trend of continuous increase in gold and gold value and demand for gold will continue. So we are positive that our investment will also have decent returns. Thank you.
We still have 15 minutes. We can take them. So we had a hand. The New Times was. We have someone from the New Times, and then Musoni. Yes.
Thank you so much, Governor. All right. Thank you so much, Governor, for the updates. My name is Jessica Mtamba from the New Times. From your presentation, we've seen a notable improvement within e-cash flows, but also on the ground, some businesses and individuals still prefer to use cash due to transaction costs. For instance, in businesses, persistent concerns from businesses is the double charges applied when using business codes. Like when a businesses are being charged when client sends money on the business codes, and again when withdrawing from it, and that discourages e-cash flows. How is the central bank intending to address such issues? Thank you. Sorry, I'm nervous.
Thank you. I'm Emmanuel Nirenganya, analyst for the New Times. I want to know what the implication of the 25 basis points that have been raised on the central rate. And you tell us, does as I was saying, I would like to understand the 25 basis points that were raised on the central bank lending rate. What impact should we expect on the financial sector? And you can tell us really how does central bank decisions such as this affect the lending rates and control inflation. And you talk pension benefits payout. That's so a rise of 61%. So I want to understand what are really the underlying factors for such increment, and what does it mean to the pension scheme and also the lives of the retirees. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Fiona. I'm with RBA. My question is in regards to the financial sector. In the presentation, it says the indicators, it will remain stable. However, there are some risks. And one of that risk mentioned was the rise in costs of funds in the global market. Maybe if you could share with us, what impact do you foresee on access to finance, especially looking at entrepreneurs, businesses here in Rwanda? Thank you.
Thank you for the questions. We will start with the question on eCash and merchant electronic payments that I would ask our Acting Director for Financial Sector Development and Conduct to respond to it, Valence. On the question on also pension benefits and probably the risk on cost of fund, our ED for Financial Stability, Sheila, would respond to it. And I can respond to the foreseen impact of this slight increase of CBR, maybe starting with explaining the transmission mechanism. So there's what theoretically happens and what happens on the ground. Monetary policy instruments that the National Bank of Rwanda has to maintain price stability is around the central bank rate, adjusting it to make sure that we don't go above the 8% in terms of inflation, or even below 2%, because that would not be good for the economy. And so once we set the central bank rate, the expectation, if all things were going according to theory, meaning as in advanced economies where you see central bank rate either increasing or decreasing, and you see it automatically on the lending rates for financial markets that are already developed. For us, it takes a while to start translating, let's say, the 0.25% increase into money market, so the interbank. For now, we can see that that transmission is immediate, as we've seen. Secondly, from money market, then deposit rate, and then lending rate. On the interbank rate, what we have seen in the second quarter is that actually, on average, the interbank rate was lower than the 6.5% CBR that we've had since August 2024. And this is because the supply of money or liquidity in the banking sector is very high for the reasons that we mentioned even last time. Less domestic borrowing for government, meaning that banks have to now adjust their investments according to the new opportunities that they have, because the treasury bonds that they used to invest in are not as, we don't have many issuances by government, which is a good thing on the fiscal side, and is, banks have to take time to adjust to it. The good thing we're seeing is that even on the lending rate, there's more competition. The lending rate is going down. And we've seen that liquidity is still ample, so we don't expect that there would be any addition to the lending rate. One, because of ample liquidity, more competition in the banking sector, but also we started reviewing the pricing models of banks and microfinance, and some of the institutions were actually overpricing their interest rates. And so by making sure that they have adequate pricing models, this slight increase is not likely to translate into any increase in lending rates, as we continue also to work with the banks in really having risk-based pricing, which is a sign of our modern economy, and we are very confident that we will continue to see that trend that we've seen on lending rates continue through the year. Now, that's how our CBR impacts prices. Our main control would be on core inflation, where by tightening monetary policy, you actually tighten demand. But we cannot act alone as central bank. There has to be other policy measures. The last that we've seen in 2022, 2023, where government comes in with subsidy to make sure that essential products can still be affordable. Efforts by government to also increase agricultural production, because food inflation is still represent 27% in the consumer index. So as central bank, we don't have any tool to impact, but in our role as economic advisor to government, when we see those risks, that's where we work with all the stakeholders to make sure that agricultural production, investments are made on time, and that we can make sure that there are measures to support production. So that's how also that coordination with all those stakeholders is important and allows us to continue maintaining price stability. I'll stop here and again give the floor to Valence.
Thank you, Governor. The question was on the cost of digital payments. When we say the cost of digital payments, basically using technology to pay. And technology doesn't come at zero cost. There's someone who invests in technology and hires people to operate that technology to enable us to do digital payments. So our ambition in terms of driving digital payments, we want digital payments that is faster, that is affordable, that is convenient. But then when it comes to cost, of course, any cost is a cost. I remember when we entered into COVID, we zeroed all these digital payments, and there was adoption. But then after COVID, then these technology companies that had invested had to come and say, hey, we have invested. And the cost they wanted to reinstate was higher. I remember they were negotiating something around 1%, but we said, no, you can't do 1%. Do 0.5%. That was a discussion, and the central bank negotiated that. So, but something that, we always speak and emphasize in our cashless campaigns is the cost of convenience. If you have to send money from here to Rubavu, and now you sit probably in your shop and send, what amount are you willing to pay for that convenience? Of course, I'm not saying we shouldn't address the issue of cost. And one of the things that we look at the central bank, how can we bring down the cost of these digital payments? There is an issue of, as many people use these digital payments, there's economies of scale, and the cost is going to come down. So it's something that I can say that, it's a journey that we are on, that you're working with different stakeholders, government, central bank, and even the payment service, providers. And we look forward to addressing it. But one thing that always speak in the cashless campaigns, we should be willing to pay for convenience. And if you are queuing up, for example, in a bank, you can queue up in a bank like 3 hours. But now, what amount are you willing to pay for someone who saves you from queuing up for 3 hours? So there is an issue of cost. Yes, it has to come down. But there's also understanding and culture. And by the way, since COVID, we're seeing increased uptake of these digital payments. As people appreciate the convenience, that alertness and the complaint of cost, that momentum is going down. But just want to say that, we're working together with our government stakeholders and payment service providers to see that, we can have it as affordable as possible. Thank you.
Sheila?
Thank you, Governor. Maybe I'll start by explaining on the government borrowing, what it means. So when government goes to the market, it technically goes through issuance of bonds or treasury bills. And because most businesses and individuals trust that it's safer to lend to government through this, they prefer to go there than to invest in equities. So when governments, we are not seeing that here currently because government is actually reducing its footprint on the market, but internationally it's increasing, and it has an effect that comes onto our sector through what the financial sector borrows on the international market. So when banks price their products, they basically base this on the cost at which they borrowed from international players. And as the prices for funds increase globally, so the banks borrow at higher rates, and as a result, they would lend at higher rates. But like Governor explained earlier, this has not been seen, and it's actually not anticipated, because part of the government fiscal consolidation policy means that it's gradually reducing its footprint in terms of the facilities that it's putting onto the market. There was a question on the pension benefits. I am not sure if you could repeat the question. Yeah.
Yeah, the question was pension benefits payouts to retirees, so a 61% increment. So we wanted to know what are the underlying factors for such growth and the implications on the pension scheme. Of course, because that means more funds from the pension scheme is being paid out to retirees, and on the livelihoods of pensioners, what are the implications? Yeah, thank you.
So you would know that at the beginning of this year, 2025, January, there was an increase in the contributions to the mandatory pension scheme, RSSB, and this has increased the contributions that are going to the fund. If you saw in our presentation, that went up by 108%. So the contributions is what the employees and employers contribute to the fund for their retirement time. Now, when this was being rolled out, it was intended, one of the reasons was intended to improve the welfare of the retirees. And as a result, alongside the increment in the contributions, there was also an increment in what the benefits would be to those that are retiring. So I would say that what we see right now is what we expect this to actually be higher, because this is just between January and today. But as we move forward, we anticipate that this will even increase alongside the contributions that are being made, because the different bands of the benefits to retirees, especially the lowest band, was almost doubled. And so this would mean that the benefits are higher. What does this mean to the fund? Part of the reason the contributions were increased was to enable the fund to remain sustainable, but also make a good contribution to the whole economic growth. So the fund is anticipated to remain sustainable and able to meet all its obligations and expectations, despite the growing benefits that are being paid out.
And take last round of questions and close.
Yeah, we can take from Osaki had a question, and Royal FM.
Murakoze, nitwa Uswalo Skakembe, nkora kuri Radio 10. Ndashaka kuvuga ku birebana na ejo heza. Imibare y'abatangura musanzu ni munini, ariko ayo usanga buri muntu aba yarashyizemo ni make. Hari n'usanga yarashyizemo 500 gusa. Mugasanga rero ari RSSB, ari mwebwe BNR, murishimira ngo abantu ni benshi, kandi najya mu kiruko kizabukuru ayo 500 ntacyo azamumarira. Turagira ngo mudusobanure icyo mukora kugira ngo n'uyatanze abatanze kuko amafaranga ashobora kuzagira icyo amumarira, niba atangiye akomeze agenda ashyiraho kuzageza naho ubundi byaba wenda bifite akamaro ku rwego rw'inyungu z'igihugu, ariko kuri wa muntu ku giti cye ntacyo byazaba bimaze. Ikindi ni ikirebana nyine ni uburyo mwabivuga mu Kinyarwanda, guhererekanya amafaranga ku buryo bw'ikoranabuhanga birahenze. Bino bigo bya telecommunication bikora byunama ku baturage ku rwego rwo hejuru, nko kohereza amafaranga uyavana kuri telefone, kuri mobile money uyohereza kuri konti muri banki, ni umusaraba mu yindi. sinzi icyo mubikoraho murakoze.
Yeah, thank you, Governor. So you said that the financial sector is expected to remain stable and resilient. For that, my question is, mu guhangana n'ingaruka zizamuka ry'igiciro cy'amafaranga ku isoko mpuzamahanga n'iryo mu gihugu imbere muri rusange, ni iyihe gahunda beneri ifite kugira ngo ibiciro by'inguzanyo bitabangamira abikorera n'abaturage muri rusange? Ikindi ni kijyanye na fraud and cyber risk. Hangaha hakomeje kugaragaza ko fraud and cyber risk biteye impungenge. Nizihe ngamba zihariye cyangwa se muri rusange ingamba zihari cyangwa se zaba ziteganya gushyirwaho mu kurinda system z'imari mu gihe ikoranabuhanga ririmo gutera imbere mu Rwanda no kwisose muri rusange? Murakoze.
Murakoze. Ndahera ku kibazo cya Uswaki. Umuntu yabanza guhera ku impamvu Ejo Heza yagiyeho. Ejo Heza yagiyeho kugira ngo abantu badafite ubwishingizi cyangwa se badafite pension babona muri RSSB kuko ubundi ari umukozi bayakata ku mushahara, nabo baba bafite uko bizigamira, leta igashyiramo nkunganire kuko yongeraho ikindi gice hanyuma ukazabona iyo pension. Nibyo koko haracyari urugendo kuko biterwa n'amafaranga washizemo, ariko icyo twakwishimira nuko mu gihugu cyacu hatekerejwe n'abantu bari muri informal sector badafite akazi gatuma hari contribution bashyira muri RSSB, nabo bashobore kubona uko bizigamira, na leta ishyiremo amafaranga atuma banabona n'ubwishingizi ku buzima hagize ugize ibyago agapfa mbere y'igihe nibura umuryango we ukayabona. Kugira ngo rero umuntu ashobore ibikorwa byose muri politiki y'ubukungu, no kugira ngo umunyarwanda ubushobozi bwe bwiyongere anabone n'amafaranga yizigamira. Wavuze uti harakorwa iki? Burya ibyo dukora byose kugira ngo ubukungu budahungabana ni ukugira ngo umuntu ashobore kugira income cyangwa se icyo ageraho, niba ashyira amafaranga ye yaba muri banke yabaho ayashora imari, ayo mafaranga ntahungabane. Ni ibintu byinshi bigomba guteranya, ariko ndumva ikintu twagombye kwishimira nuko Ejo Heza ihari, abantu benshi bayitabiriye kandi mwabonye ko abantu koko bari muri informal sector ari bo benshi, kandi ko n'amafaranga y'icyo kigega akomeza kwiyongera. Hari ubusesenguzi burimo kuba koko kugira ngo umuntu arebe Ejo Heza se ni ikindi cyakorwa kugira ngo abantu bayitabire kurushaho, kuko hari bamwe itarageraho kandi n'umusaruro uteganyijwe ugerweho. Hari nk'abantu bavuga bati iyo nyashyizemo ngomba gutegereza imyaka myinshi, niba nari mfite imyaka nka 25 ntago nazategereza 65. Ese nta yindi products mwashyiramo ku buryo ngize impamvu zihutirwa zituma nkenera nibura igice cy'ayo mafaranga nayabona? Hari mu ibiganiro biriho ku buryo n'ibyo byagiye bigaragara ku bantu cyane cyane abari bato bavuga ati sinategereza imyaka 40 ngo ngere kuri ayo mafaranga, nabo boroherezwa. Ariko ibyo biracyaganirwaho n'izo ngamba zashyirwaho, ariko nagira ngo twerekane no muri babe kuko natwe Ejo Heza ni ikigega tureberera ko tubona kikomeje kwitabirwa kandi kifashe neza, gicunzwe neza, ariko hari n'ibyo bigomba gukorwa koko kugira ngo abantu bakomeze kukitabira ari benshi kandi umusaruro biteze, no kugira ngo kwizigamira no kuzabona amafaranga bageze mu zabukuru nabyo ari ibintu bisigasirwa kandi ari amafaranga yabatunga kuko nkuko na RSSB nayo yagiye yongera ibyo abari muri pension babona, cyane cyane ababonaga pension ziri hasi cyane. Hari ibyo wavuze ku kiguzi cyo guhererekanya amafaranga ukoresheje ikoranabuhanga. Icyo twagiye tugarukaho nuko ntabwo iyo serivisi yatangirwa ubuntu, kubera ko ibigo bitanga iyo serivisi ni ibigo byikorera, niyo yaba ari leta nayo iba yashoyemo imari. Ariko icyagiye kigaragara nuko muri iyi myaka 5 ishize, cyane cyane guhera covid, muribuka ko hari havanje gufatwa ingamba zo gukuraho icyo kiguzi kubera ko abantu batashobora guhererekanya cash. Nyuma icyo kiguzi kinasubiyeho ntago cyasubiye ku mafaranga cyari kiriho. Ikindi uko abantu benshi bayitabira ni kubundi economies of scale zatuma ayo mafaranga agabanuka. Nk'ubu muzi ko umuntu wohereza amafaranga kuri nimero ye ayakuye kuri banki ayashyira kuri nimero ye nta kiguzi acibwa, ikiguzi gicibwe yishyura kuri telefone y'undi muntu. Hari ibindi turimo kureba nabyo cyane cyane ni systeme ya e-cash aho umuntu yoherezanya amafaranga noneho kuva ku kigo kimwe kijya ku kindi, kandi ni Switch ni company ya leta kureba investment zajyamo kugira ngo ikiguzi cyongere kigabanuke cyane cyane ku bantu bohererezanya, ariko ntago twabizeza ngo icyo giciro nta kiguzi ni service y'imari, buri service yose bifite ikiguzi. Icyo dushaka nuko icyo kiguzi kitabangamira umuturage kandi koko kiba gisobanuwe n'ishoramari ibyo bigo byashyizemo, kandi aho tubonye koko hari umurengera natwe nk'abashinzwe serivisi zo kwishyurana natwe tubireba. Ariko tubona ko e-cash ikomeje kwitabirwa ndetse n'ishoramari leta yashyizemo bizatuma icyo giciro kigabanuka mu mezi ari imbere. Hari ibibazo mwabajije mutese, wenda nahera ku cyanyuma ko twavugaga serivisi zikoresha ikoranabuhanga, ibyerekeranye na fraud cyangwa abantu biba bakoresheje izo serivisi. Mwabonye ko hari campaign yatangiye yo gukangurira abantu kwirinda, ariko ntabwo ari ukwigisha gusa abantu kwirinda. Natwe nka Banki Nkuru y'u Rwanda tureberera serivisi z'imari, hari ingamba n'amabwiriza twashyizeho atuma ibigo bitanga izo serivisi byirinda, ndetse ayo mabwiriza anerekana ibyo bigomba kuba byashyize ku murongo, yaba ari abantu bakoresha bumva ikoranabuhanga, yaba ari controls basigaho, ni ukuvuga umuntu ukora igenzura, ndetse na raporo baduha buri munsi. Ariko uko abantu bakunda gukoresha ikoranabuhanga haba hakirimo kuko ni nk'ubujura busanzwe, hadakoresha ikoranabuhanga abajura babaho muri byose. Ariko ikibi nuko ku ikoranabuhanga byo byakwihuta kandi umuntu akaba yatwara amafaranga menshi. Icyo twebwe dukora ni ugushyiraho ayo mabwiriza, ariko no gukora amagenzura kureba ko koko ayo mabwiriza akoreshwa. Ikindi hari icyo twita Financial Sector Center, Security Center, Operation Center twashyize muri BNR ihuza amakuru y'amabanki yose, kugira ngo niba habaye nk'ibyo bya cyber incident, igitero cy'abantu baba bashaka kwinjira muri systeme za banki imwe, twese tumenyera amakuru rimwe ku buryo dufata ingamba kandi tubona icyo kintu gifashe, kuko tunakorana n'ikigo cya NCSA nacyo kiduha amakuru ku buryo nta incident twari twabona muri ubyo buryo, kubera yaba izo ngamba zashyizweho, ubufatanye n'inzego zitandukanye ndetse n'ibigo by'imari, ndetse no gukomeza guhugura abakozi baba bashinzwe ubugenzuzi mu bijyana n'ikoranabuhanga muri BNR, ndetse nabo mu bigo by'imari, kandi nabo cyane cyane baba ari abayobozi bashinzwe ikoranabuhanga, nabo ni BNR bemeza ibanje kureba ko bafite qualifications ndetse bafite n'uburambe mu kazi bwatuma systeme z'ikoranabuhanga mu bigo by'imari nta hungabana byagira. Ikindi wari wavuze ku biciro by'inguzanyo, mwabonye ko muri iki gihembwe cya kabiri, ariko ni n'ibintu twari twatangiye kubona guhera umwaka ushize, igiciro cy'inguzanyo ku mpuzandengo kiragenda kigabanuka, ubu kigeze kuri 15.9%. Ikindi ni uko tubona ko uko ibigo by'imari bigenda bitanga inguzanyo cyane cyane harimo competition, nabyo byagiye bituma icyo kiguzi kimanuka. Ariko nanone kugira ngo ikiguzi cy'inguzanyo kimanuke, ibigo by'imari bigomba kuba bifite deposit cyangwa abantu bizigamira ari benshi mu gihe kirekire, kugira ngo nabo bashobore gutanga inguzanyo z'igihe kirekire. Aho rero urugero rwo kwizigamira cyane cyane mu bihugu biri mu nzira y'amajyambere nk'icyacu kiba kikiri hasi, niyo mpamvu ubona ko ikiguzi cy'inguzanyo kiba kikiri hejuru, kuko amabanki abashaka cyane cyane ibigo bizana uko kwizigama, ariko bitaranabona abantu bahagije bizigama ku buryo buhagije. Ariko nibura turabona ko iki giciro cy'inguzanyo kigenda kimanuka gahoro, kandi nk'uko twabisobanuye natwe hari isesengura twakoze kugira ngo turebe uko ibyo biciro by'inguzanyo bishyirwaho byubahirije koko models, kandi baba banarebye koko banarebye risque z'uyu muntu ibyago yagira byo kutishyura aho gupfa gushyiraho ibiciro gusa. Ubu tugenda tuganira na buri banke kugira ngo aho tubona yuko bashyize ibiciro hejuru twerekane muri izo sesengura n'izo models twakoze yuko hari uko bashobora kubigabanya. Ubu twizera ko naho mu mezi ari imbere hari izindi mpinduka twabona nk'izo twabonye muri iki gihembwe cya kabiri.
Thank you, Governor. I think this marks, I don't know whether we can take one, but we are past time.
I think we've given enough information, but we're always ready to respond to questions. Kandi hari n'ibindi biganiro that I know are planned with individual media centers. Twagira ngo tubashimire nk'abanyamakuru murabafatanya n'abafatanyabikorwa kandi kuba mwadukurikiye no gukomeza kwitabira ibiganiro byacu. Murakoze, tubifurije umunsi mwiza. Have a good day everyone. Thank you.